With the exception of Gojo versus Sukuna, what do you think is the most iconic fight in Jujutsu Kaisen? Is it the Sukuna raid? Is it Yuji vs Chozo? Is it Yuji and Todo versus Mahito? Is it Sukuna vs Mahoraga? Or is it that one Culling Games fight which was so hype it transcended the series and set Jujutsu Kaisen on the path of having generational influence over anime and even non-anime related trends across all of social media? Yeah, it's definitely that one.
Let's go gambling!
I am, of course, talking about Hakari vs Kashimo, a fight so unbelievably loved that it became one of shonen's most iconic battles in recent times, despite not even being animated yet. The Tukadonka edits, the "this is a funeral for the living" quotes, the "that's how losers think" quotes, and of course the
Hakari never acquired reverse cursed technique
AI narrator posts that you see around social media to this very day. There is simply no denying that Hakari vs Kashimo is Jujutsu Kaisen's most iconic fight and a big reason why the series is so insanely popular, with the sole exception of Gojo vs Sukuna, of course. It might not be the best fight in the manga or even in your top 3, but you are simply delusional if you cannot recognize just how insanely iconic this fight has become. Therefore, in this edition of my Culling Games analysis series, I will be analyzing, critiquing, and glazing the fan favorite fight that is Kinji Hakari versus Hajime Kashimo, as well as discussing all the things that I think the anime really need to do in order to make sure it lives up to the massive hype. Before we get into it though, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out the membership options, and answer this one very important question for me, alright? Is this not the funniest thumbnail you've ever seen for a JJK video? I'm sorry, I need to point it out because literally every time I look at it, it nearly brings me to tears. Like, bro, why is Kashimo blushing? Oh, sorry, yeah, anyway, let's go. I'm gonna start things off by glazing Hakari, plain and simple. Which reminds me, everyone should go and like Gambler's comment because every time I mention Hakari's name, he just kind of spontaneously spawns into my comment section. Hakari was mentioned by Gojo way back in the beginning of the manga and immediately put in the same tier as Yuta, as well as being one of the many sorcerers that Gojo delusionally believed would surpass him. Following Shibuya, Yuji and Megami recruit him to help participate in the Culling Games, but we don't see him do anything significant until he fights special grade bum Charles Bernard. And no, I will not be analysing that fight because who actually gives a fuck? It is then that we learn Hakari's technique is linked to his domain expansion just like Higuruma. He has a non-lethal sure hit that pours information about his technique into the opponent's head, which means it's supposedly, that's the key word here, strong in a domain clash and can activate the curse technique pretty much instantly. I mean, he can literally start spinning the wheel within 0.2 seconds. It's kind of crazy. To non-Japanese people who aren't familiar with pachinko machines, my advice to you is give up, bro. Just stop, okay? There is no point trying to understand the nitty-gritty details of how it works. All you need to know is that it's a slot machine which Hakari has absolutely rigged the hell out of to guarantee a jackpot within a certain amount of spins. The important part is that once he gets a jackpot, there are factors like increased probability or faster spins that he can access in the next round. It kind of works like a Black Flash, to be honest. Once Hakari gets a jackpot, he will just keep on getting them over and over until he eventually makes his opponent want to bash their skull into a brick wall. Throughout his fight with Kashimo, though, one thing becomes blatantly obvious. Hakari is a god-tier aura farmer. His fighting style is completely made up and performative, like some hybrid between scrappy street fighting and WWE. I mean, it's very clear that he has no training, or at least when he was given training, he paid no attention. It makes for a really interesting dynamic with Kashimo, who appears much more technical and more skilled than Hakari in hand-to-hand combat, but Hakari counters this by simply hitting much harder. Gege's phenomenal battle artwork in this fight makes it very clear to see that Hakari barely even budges when Kashimo lands direct hits, but when Hakari lands even one attack, it is enough to send Kashimo flying. Hakari's fighting style also involves him being stupidly aggressive and just eating damage because of his automatic healing and immortality when in jackpot. So when the two throw hands with each other, Kashimo often shows greater technique and lands more hits, and Hakari shows greater strength by really making it count when he lands a blow. Their fighting style isn't the only reason why these two have such a great dynamic though, because they are also the only two sorcerers who have a unique cursed energy trait. Kashimo has an electricity trait, which Hakari can completely ignore because he's just that guy, I guess. Alright, thanks Gege. And Hakari in turn has what Gege describes as Yeah, sandpaper cursed energy. Cool. It started off as being hit by a serrated bat. Wow, that sounds like it does damage. That sounds dangerous, but no. Later on, we change it to sandpaper. Okay, right, well, I guess it's still a cool concept, but in true Jujutsu Kaisen fashion, it's mentioned once and then literally never again. Which is honestly such a shame, because I really hoped Kashimo would later teach Hakari how to best utilize his cursed energy trait, similar to how he does with his lightning. But oh well, I guess. Unlike Sendai Colony, where Yuta stood in stark contrast to the monsters that he was fighting because he loathed fighting, Hakari and Kashimo just so happened to both be monsters with the same "that's how losers think" mentality, which I thought was really cool. This might just be a coincidence, but I also love the fact that Hakari spams his curse technique, which makes him unkillable, whereas Kashimo can't even use his at all because it kills him. Actually, I believe Gege decided that Kashimo's curse technique would be a one-time use during this fight in order to try and fix one of the biggest problems I have with this fight as a whole, but more on that later because I am not done glazing just yet. What I hope you have taken away from this section is that Hakari and Kashimo, both being newly introduced characters, immediately stole the show, and came together to create an incredibly unique and interesting matchup, which yet again demonstrates my overall points across my whole Culling Games analysis series, which is that Gege did an amazing job creating the actual matchups to be perfectly suited to each character. At this point in the story, Yuji works best in a battle of morals and ideals, Megami works best in a contest of strategy and resolve, Yuta works best in a free-for-all where multiple different techniques are in play, and Hakari works best in an all-out 1v1 between merciless monsters who are in it purely for love of the game. Let's be real, that's why they're both here. Well, I say that Hakari's also here because he was promised to, get help setting up his illegal fight club and make it, a national level thing. Do you know what? That's not even relevant. It literally never comes up again. Anyway, I think pairing the guy who is famous for one-shotting all of his opponents effortlessly against a modern-day sorcerer who literally cannot die makes for a peak matchup. Realistically though, their dynamic is not what made this fight as iconic as it was. The real reason for that is simply hype moments and aura. There's really not much more to it. Mainly from Hakari, but Kashimo also had some bangers. I'm not even gonna try and deny that. I mean, Hakari has so much aura that he literally causes music to blast from his body when in jackpot, which makes him do things like dance and grab his crotch after sending a top 10 sorcerer flying into next Tuesday. Bro even pulls up to the fight with a cold superhero landing, and don't even get me started on that panel where he's literally just fully naked for no reason at all. To be honest, all the Tukadonka edits paired with Kashimo's "that's how losers think" and "funeral for the living" quotes are what should show up on Google if you search for the definition of aura. And again, with the exception of Gojo vs Sukuna, Hakari vs Kashimo also has the absolute best double spread panels and battle artwork in the entire series. I don't think anything else comes close. The brutality of the fight and the free use of graphic, violent injuries works so well, especially because Hakari can take all the injuries pretty much consequence-free. I mean, at one point, Kashimo splits Hakari's entire face open by smacking him with a steel door. Like, come on, surely anime pain just works differently to normal pain, because there is no way this 18-year-old kid is grinning like a madman psychopath after having his face literally ripped off his skeleton. And hardly anyone actually remembers this moment, because it comes straight after back-to-back double spreads where they both race towards shipping containers and proceed to literally volley one in between each other until it's nothing more than a strip of tinfoil. Unfortunately though, the iconic moments in this fight were not the only thing to come out of it, because all the power scaling sons decided to lock in and push some serious Jujutsu Kaisen agenda. Which is completely fine, I don't have a problem with people doing that, but it's kind of weird when they act as if you're gonna go to hell if you dare disagree with them. And I am, of course, talking about the cursed lightning dodge discourse that this chapter caused. You see, Kashimo has the ability to separate the positive and negative charge of his electricity. When physically striking his opponent, he can place a positive charge on their body, and once enough negative charge has been accumulated in his own body, he can discharge a bolt of lightning through the air that is drawn to the positive charge on his opponent, which creates a sort of domainless sure hit, but it functions the same way as a lightning speed homing attack. Kashimo does this to Hakari pretty early on in the fight and severs Hakari's arm, which he then instantly regenerates and smacks Kashimo in the face. But what's incredibly awkward about this moment is the kind of very weird paneling that Gege chose to use for this moment, because it looks as if the bolt was initially aiming for Hakari's head. Now, many people use this to argue that Hakari dodged lightning and scaled JJK top tiers to lightning speed. Now, I think it's possible, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't be surprised, but based on the fact that Kashimo makes a point about aiming aiming for his head with the exact same attack later on in the fight, and Hakari not being able to move in time despite him mentally reacting to it, which I'll give him credit for. This kind of indicates, to me at least, that the bolt was always headed for his arm and Hakari didn't dodge shit. Also, the fact that it's a homing attack that literally cannot be dodged by definition should support this, but JJK fans don't read, so whatever. At the same time though, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's definitely not the case, because it is a fictional story written by a guy who has made it very clear he doesn't give a single crap about power scaling, only about what looks cool and works for the story, which is why I respect Gege so much, because, you know, screw power scaling, it stinks. Despite the boring scaling discourse that this fight created for JJK though, the hype moments and aura of Hakari's entrance, Kashimo's quotes, the domain expansions, the jackpots, the hand-to-hand, and the subtle aura farming moments like when Hakari, you know, casually floats from a hanging cursed spirit like he's Mary Poppins, is the reason why this fight ultimately became so iconic. It's the moments like this. There were so many opportunities for edits, memes, and social media trends that this fight created, and fortunately for us, the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbase grabbed hold of every single one of those opportunities, which of course led to this fight's massive success. Now, in terms of the actual fight between Hakari and Kashimo, there really isn't much for me to analyze beyond the hype moments that I've already discussed and the hidden depth behind Hakari. I mean, it's not like you want to sit here listening to me just describe every single page to you. It's an analysis video. I'm not trying to narrate an audiobook here. Which is why I wanted to make a section discussing what I think the anime really does need to do in order to make sure that this fight lives up to its slightly unrealistic expectations. Because to be completely honest, I feel like a decent amount of fans are actually going to be slightly disappointed with the anime's adaptation, due to them expecting something that aligns more with the edits and memes. Tsukadonka is not going to be played. Hakari's theme song is literally a love song with lyrics so cheesy that I'm very glad we're only going to have to hear them in Japanese. Despite it being a love song though, they definitely can still make it hype and match the tone of the fight, which is something I think they definitely need to do in order to meet expectations. The animation itself will obviously be top tier, I have no doubt about that, but what will really make or break this fight in Season 3 are factors like music, voice acting, choreography, pacing, and additional content, potentially. Seeing improvements from the manga be put into the anime is what every JJK fan is hoping for, and in my opinion, there are some great opportunities for it in this fight. First of all, I hope MAPPA does what they did for Shibuya fights and just make them both look way stronger. I mean, I know they are already hella strong, I'm not trying to downplay them, alright? I just want more. Forget accurate scaling, no one cares, just make sure they look hella impressive. I mean, if you go and read Jogo versus Sukuna in the manga, it's like half a chapter long. It's a couple of pages and nowhere near as impressive as what we see, which is why Jogo looks so much stronger in the anime than he does in the manga. That is good. Do that. Screw scaling, I don't care, alright? If you want to have Hakari just outright dodging the lightning, do it. I'm not going to be mad, I think it'll be great, alright? And then we can all ignore the inconsistent scaling in the manga and just stick with the anime. I'm fine with that, that's cool. Change the Naoya Mark III statement while you're at it, alright? Yeah, do it all. I also would love to see Hakari's themes of luck be applied to Black Flash in that fight, because I thought that was a big missed opportunity for him, and it would help solidify the idea that he truly is a Jujutsu top tier. I mean, I would say that I doubt they would make such a big change, but they literally did the exact same thing for Yuta in JJK Volume 0 for the same reason. So, who knows? Choreography is also a massively important factor in fights, but based on how MAPPA has handled Jujutsu Kaisen so far, I definitely have faith that they will do a good job. And this fight is already, you know, kind of laid out for them choreography-wise, because Gege puts a lot of time and effort into drawing the fight and the little in-between moments where they're just throwing hands. Just like I said in my Sendai analysis video, manga readers often gloss over the smaller details and wordless panels of the fights because there isn't anything to read, which makes sense, it's fine, but at the same time it fools people into only really remembering the highlights of the fight. That is why anime is so important, because all those panels of hand-to-hand combat and minor details become way more apparent when you actually see them as part of an animated sequence. I also just really hope the color scheme for these characters is unique as hell. Like, please, give Hakari purple cursed energy. For the love of God, just do it. In fact, this fight would be even more awesome if MAPPA pulled a JoJo's and changed up the hues and color gradients used during the hype moments. Something like that would fit really well with Hakari's whole aesthetic in my opinion, because I think Hakari could deadass just be a JoJo's character. Considering that it is MAPPA though, I have full faith in the anime adaptation of this fight, and would be happy with anything on par with what they've currently shown us. I just wanted to warn you guys about not expecting it to be the same as all the iconic edits where Tsukadonka is used. Now, if I tried to discuss every single thing about this fight that made it so great, we would genuinely be here for hours. So instead, I'm gonna keep it at this and move on to discuss something that you probably never thought you would ever hear, especially not from me. Aura and hype moments aside, I think Kinji Hakari has some amazing and criminally underrated writing. As discussed in depth in my previous Culling Games videos, Gojo's strongest students each have their own unique way of representing the very long-running theme of reforming Jujutsu society and breaking the cycle of curses. Yuji's role in that is to continue Gojo's dream and save people from going down a cursed and dark path, just like he did with Higuruma. Yuta then kind of stoops down to Gojo's level instead of rising above it, and tries to save Gojo himself from that very same curse of isolation, which isn't what Gojo wants for him. He wanted Yuta to be better, but that's what Yuji's for. Despite it being much less apparent in the story and very different though, Hakari also has his own unique role to play in this very theme. You see, what Hakari's character is meant to represent is progressive change in the world, which is a big part of why Gojo holds him in such high regard. I mean, the reason why Jujutsu higher-ups looked down on Hakari in the first place was because of his gambling-focused technique. It was too modern and not traditional enough for their taste. His obsession with gambling, manga, and the fever is a very youthful theme, which the old heads in Jujutsu society look down on. The most important part of this theme, however, is Kirara and Urame's dynamic with Hakari. Everyone had a jolly old time busting jokes about Hakari collecting femboys when he was fighting Urame, but I think the decision to put Hakari against Urame was for a very deliberate and theme-driven reason, which lots of people actually decided to gloss over. Well, not decided, I'm not saying it was deliberate, it's just people weren't clocking. It's fine. But during his official introduction, Hakari is very strongly implied to have a romantic/sexual relationship with Kirara, who was born a biological male, but is a more feminine-presenting sorcerer. For the vocal minority of absolute weirdos who are in complete denial of progressive themes like this being present in your story, allow me to share definitive evidence of what I'm saying. Kirara is stated to be a biological male at birth, but clearly feels more comfortable presenting themselves in a feminine manner, and similar to Urame, their gender identity is never actually stated outright. I believe Gege leaves it deliberately kind of open for interpretation. Now, as for how I know that Kirara's relationship with Hakari is romantic or sexual in nature, well, he's literally sitting there clasping onto Kirara's butt cheeks like his life depends on it. So unless you often do that in a platonic relationship with your homies, argue with the wall. Similarly, Hakari always referred to Urame as they and never used a gender-conforming pronoun for them. For those of you who don't know, Gege recently confirmed that Urame was biologically a male in the Heian era, who personally requested that they be reincarnated into a female body by Kenjaku, which strongly suggests that Urame doesn't identify as male. Again, since their actual gender identity is unconfirmed, it's reasonable to use they or she. I think Gege does leave these things open for interpretation. The fact that Hakari has a relationship with Kirara and would go on to be Urame's opponent in the final fight plays very strongly into Hakari's theme of being a youthful and progressive sorcerer that perfectly aligns with what Gojo wants the new generation to be, and goes against pretty much everything the old generation of Jujutsu sorcerers, stand for. Again, it's much more subtle than Yuta and Yuji's representation of the theme, but it is present nonetheless, and I really like it. So, despite being a character mostly carried by his hype moments and aura, Hakari is actually deceptively well written for the admittedly short time that he actually appears in the manga. And that is his main flaw as a character, and why his writing kind of falls short is because he's just not around enough. Okay, as for Hakari himself, I have absolutely no criticisms whatsoever for this fight, and to be honest, I don't have any for Kashimo either. Most of the problems with each of these characters are more so to do with their lacking performance later on in the manga, which obviously has nothing to do with this fight. I also have no critiques about the execution of the fight itself. We all know that it's peak. My absolute biggest problem with this whole section though is that from a character perspective, having these two be each of their first proper on-screen fights poses a massive problem for them moving forward. Hakari had obviously been gassed up by the likes of Yuta and Gojo for as far back as, the detention center arc, and Kashimo was set up to be a top-tier sorcerer that wants to face Sukuna because he was way too strong for any other opponent he has ever faced. Both characters have a narrative that demands a performance and success, but by having their first big fight be against each other, it inevitably leads to one of them losing. Hakari obviously couldn't lose because of all his hype and build-up, but Kashimo losing kind of undermined his whole theme of wanting to fight the strongest because no one else could even hold a candle to him. Kashimo did lose though, plain and simple. It's likely the first time he ever flat out lost to another sorcerer, and he was ready to accept his fate at the hands of Hakari because of it. The Kashimo Glazers won't agree, which is completely fine. I'm not trying to convince you otherwise at all, I'm simply explaining my own opinion on the matter. I speculate that Gege also recognized this problem and designed Kashimo's curse technique to be a one-time use, which he would only ever use against Sukuna in order to try and nullify this issue, which wasn't a terrible idea, to be honest. At least it wouldn't have been a bad idea if he had actually done something when he finally did use his bum-ass technique later on. By having Hakari win and then saying Kashimo was fighting without his curse technique the whole time allows Hakari to have a necessary victory while also showing that Kashimo is actually still strong enough to live up to his themes. And again, this probably would have worked out completely fine if Gege didn't fumble Kashimo later on. Does this problem really matter to me that much though? No. Would I instead choose to not have this fight exist in order to avoid such an issue? Definitely not. The fight is so good that I honestly don't care that much. It just sucks that Kashimo never really landed as an interesting or particularly impressive character to me. However, I have a sneaking suspicion that the anime might make me switch up and give me a good reason to actually like Kashimo. At least I really hope that it does. I want to finish things off here by clearing something up that any long-time viewer of mine is probably wondering right now. Why am I switching up and choosing to glaze Hakari? Don't I normally slander Hakari? Yes, I do. I do normally slander the out of Hakari, okay? But the reason I don't like Hakari is because I really like Hakari. Okay, that makes no sense, but hear me out. Hakari is the GOAT, plain and simple. Hakari is an insanely cool character with an incredibly unique design and a peak curse technique. He is by all accounts the perfect character and an amazing addition to Jujutsu Kaisen's top tiers. The reason I dislike him is because of how horrifically, terribly Gege fumbled the bag. He is easily the most wasted character in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, contested only by Yuki and Kenjaku. Bro fights Kashimo and then has about 3 speaking lines before getting half a chapter fighting Arame, where he stresses over losing his Jordans and then is pretty much never heard of again. He didn't even win the fight, he just stalemated Arame off screen and literally never even met Sukuna face to face. Hakari went from being a generational GOAT to a generational fumble, and it really sucks. Still though, Hakari versus Kashimo as a fight is peak, and it will hopefully blow up the internet once again when MAPPA animates it. That concludes my analysis of Hakari vs Kashimo though, so as always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out the membership options, and stay tuned for the next edition of my Culling Games analysis series, which will of course be the peak fiction awakening of Maki Zenin.